geopolitics transpires will determine whether we're going into a renewed phase of prosperity or else we're going into very volatile, difficult times, which probably will lead to rolling recessions, notwithstanding Trump's fantastic sweep across America. The first thing that we need to look at is how the BRICS group of nations is not only maturing, but expanding. And in PPP terms, BRICS has a larger share of the global economy than does G7. The fundamental problem is that BRICS wants a multilateral world, which is quite the opposite to how G7 operates today, dominated by one currency and one country. This monopolistic approach has led to wars, conflicts. You don't do what we ask you to do, we come in and smash you. Look what's happened in the Middle East the last 20 years. So it was very interesting. The Kazan summit meeting was basically saying we need to reform the big institutions that govern the world, like United Nations, WTO, IMF, World Bank, etc., because it's the big countries that dominate and make the policies. Now with the BRICS countries, the Deep South, Africa, etc., where future growth is coming from, there's very little influence. So what the declaration is actually saying, we don't want to oppose you. We want our fair share in how policies are made. The problem is that the G7 led by America is very unlikely to give away their authority. So therefore, the BRICS is laying out a path towards a world outside the G7. The big picture suggests to me that sometime, maybe not before 2027, 2028, there is this big risk of World War III. However, it's possible that the time frame could be brought forward by either or both conflict over Ukraine developing into a war between NATO and Russia, and or the conflict between Israel and Iran blowing up. What are the odds? I'm not a betting person. I had my last bet in the horse races about 60 years ago. It was a winning bet, and I said, never again. First of all, Trump is pro-Israel. Iran remembers what Trump did to them, sanctions, and the killing of their revered and senior general. So there's no love lost between them. I keep coming back, partly from what I hear in the region. Where does Israel sit at the moment? Despite what it says, people on the ground and supported by those who rarely know the local situation are pretty adamant that Israel has not defeated Hamas. Tensions on the West Bank are increasing, and that Hezbollah is giving the IDF a bloody nose. Israel launched an attack on Iran, again from those who really know, as opposed to the PR that was put out by Israel and the Western intelligence services. The first wave of Israel's F-35s, etc., never got close to Iran. They were locked on by Russia's latest radar jamming equipment and basically turned tail. And then what was due to follow them was a fleet of conventional bombers to bomb Iran. That was abandoned. So where do we sit today? Why is it that America has sent a fleet of B-52s to Qatar? Why is it that, as reported, an Israel frigate-stroke-destroyer sailed through the Suez Canal and is now in the Red Sea, armed with ballistic missiles? Israel, I liken at the moment to a caged lion. It's losing on all fronts. It is determined to achieve its objective, which basically is Israel's lands are from the sea to the river. Why is it that Israel's defense minister was fired? Because he used to be a divisional commander, close to the military, did not want an attack on Lebanon, thus an attack on Hezbollah. So he's been fired and replaced by somebody with very limited military experience, but who shares Netanyahu's beliefs. So I think the stage is being set. Whether directly or indirectly supported by America is questionable, but I keep coming back to the basic thesis. It was the UK and America who are the founding fathers of Israel, and they're not going to let Israel go. Let's say that what I piece together is correct, and that next year we're going to have a regional war here. On that basis, global inflation will take off. You don't want to be in bond markets. You want to be in inflation hedges, which will be equities and base metals and obviously gold. You want physical assets. In fact, if we're looking beyond just this medium term, the world is going to move much more into physical assets than financial assets, particularly post-2027, 2028. Because if you look at a chart of US CPI from 1960-something to 1982, and you compare it with what's happened to US CPI in recent years, it's tracking it almost very close correlation. So what it's telling us is that in the next few months, we've got a further fall in US CPI, and then it takes off. And you had a peak in the last big inflation era of the 1970s and early 80s. The peak US CPI in 1980 was 13.5%. What was the peak long-term 10-year Treasury? 15.8. What is the yield 3 to 4 years' time of 10-year treasuries yielding over 10% to a highly indebted world and a highly indebted US system? You're going to crash it. Obviously, the majority, all big analysts will say, there's no way we can have 10% yields. Well, I'm very sorry. If you've got inflation yielding 13% plus, the bond markets, which central banks don't control, they will want a return. So, sorry, but we're probably going to go close to 15%. The BRICS has laid out the path towards having a currency that is linked to assets, rather than a dollar, put bluntly, is linked to debt. So the path that the BRICS is set on is the creation of a BRICS currency, which will be 40% gold, 60% local currencies, but those currencies linked in turn to gold. So if you are South Africa and you want to borrow from the National Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, you've got to lodge a comparable amount of gold. It's interesting what China and Russia do. So I'm told Russia has a trade surplus with China. The PBOC lodges gold of a sufficient amount that covers Russia's surplus. That, I think, is going to be a linchpin to how the BRICS new system will work. First phase, it's using local currencies. It's going to take time before they actually are able, because the difficulties are immense. Conflicts between currencies, different states of development, so on and so forth. But they'll make it. So if there was no war, then I think it's probably sometime around 26, 27 before they're in a position to launch their new currency. However, I think that war will accelerate everything. And who holds most of the gold in the world? China and Russia. China, if you look at the amount of gold that Chinese citizens and institutions have bought since the Shanghai Gold Exchange was opened in 2002, it's around 25,000 tons. And I know from various people that Chinese ministries, not just the PBOC, and including the PLA, own approximately 25,000 tons. So China's total is north of 50,000 tons. Russia's, I know from what I was told about 4 years ago, so it's probably a bigger figure now, then had 12,000 tons. Russia and China's annual gold production is around 300 tons a year. I think the alliance covers everything from military to economic to education, culture. It's a very firm alliance. America has been trying to break it. They've not succeeded. I think Trump will try to break it. He won't succeed. It's all encompassing for one very simple reason. America and NATO want to dismember Russia to gain control of Russia's natural resources. And China knows that they'll be next on the list. I think I become very bullish on oil and gas, either later this year or early next year. Apart from the Middle East, America has to replenish its oil reserves, which I'm sure that Trump will do. China's economy, despite the negative opinion being hailed around by American institutions and hedge funds, is actually improving. I think between now and the end of the year, you're going to have a good pop in copper prices, and I think the other base metals will follow. I think that early next year, a lot of the bullish US government stats that have been produced since the middle of this year, revisions will come in, and we'll find that actually America has been in recession. And I think that Europe is in no better position. China will be recovering, but a large part of the world that consumes base metals won't be. And I think with recessionary trends, and we're probably going to see hopefully only limited strife in America, but it could be anything in the first 6 months. So I think we're going to see big corrections through the first 9 months or so of next year in copper and other base metals. But then, assuming we're not in war, then with Trump's plans to cut interest rates, the US economy will be recovering strongly. China's recovery will be ongoing. There you've got the two pillars of the global economy rising together in an inflationary environment as well. So late 25, 26, and early 27 will be bull markets for base metals, which will take copper to new highs. Then you don't want to be the last dancer on the floor before the music stops, because with 10-year yield, 10-year treasuries and other long-term bonds yielding 10% plus, you're going to have big collapso.